You also made a very interesting reel about the Bhagavad Gita and 12 chapters, 12 verses, and their meaning in science, right?
Yeah.
And I find the confluence of science and spirituality is that sweet spot,
Yeah.
that the union of duality, left and right.
Yeah.
Because for me, spirituality is all love. It's where my heart goes, and science actually gives me method to the madness. It's like, okay, this is also, there is logic, there's some kind of backing to it, even from science.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the process of creating that reel. More so, tell us what it was about.
So I have read the Bhagavad Gita end to end thrice now.
Okay. Which version? Let's put that up.
The ISKCON one.
The ISKCON.
But what was interesting was the first 2 times I read the interpretation also. The last time I read it, which was around 3 years ago during the pandemic, I didn't read the interpretation. I only read the verse and the translation, and I tried to interpret it.
So you read the actual shlokas?
The actual shloka, and I read the word-to-word translation from Sanskrit to English, put together the meaning, and then I interpreted it. It was done on a live stream on YouTube, 18 different live streams for 18 chapters. And initially I was hesitant, thinking that, who am I to interpret Bhagavad Gita? But over time I realized that that is a very wrong way to think, because Bhagavad Gita talks about the struggles that each and every human being goes through. And so each and every human being has the right, and in fact a duty, to interpret it by themselves.
It's everyone's.
Everyone.
Right.
Because if you remember, the first chapter is it's about Arjuna's conflict. Right. So Arjun is standing there, his cousins and everybody is in front of him, and he realizes that he is a warrior. His duty is to fight, but his duty will now make him do things that he doesn't want to do.
Honor, integrity, or honor.
Correct. Identity level.
Identity level.
Who amongst us hasn't faced this?
Yeah. That conflict.
Conflict is the essence of life.
Yeah.
Every day we wake up and we are conflicted. Gym jana hai ki nahi jana hai? You know, do you want to go for a run or not? Every day we face this conflict at different levels. So from that point onwards, the whole book is teaching you how to deal with conflict. And it breaks it down to such beautiful levels. It breaks down conflict at its social level, at its personal level, at a psychological level, at a metaphysical level. The whole book is on conflict. We can rebrand Bhagavad Gita as how to deal with conflict.
Correct.
That's what the Bhagavad Gita is. And it solves it at every level. So if you want to do it at a practical level, read this chapter. But if you want to solve it at a spiritual level, read this chapter.
Correct.
So I realized that it's not for any expert to do. It's for all of us. And we all have to interpret it from our experience. So I interpreted it from the neuroscience perspective. And a lot of it made sense. When there's a verse that talks about how there are 2 kinds of pleasure. There's a sensory pleasure and there is a higher pleasure. That's exactly what it is. In neuroscience, there is the pleasure from the senses, and then there is pleasure which is independent of the senses. So the pleasure from the senses is your typical dopamine nucleus accumbens network, which is what addiction is.
Yeah.
You eat chocolate, you feel happy, that is that. Or you smoke a cigarette or you drink alcohol and you feel happy, that is that sensory pleasure. And then there's a higher pleasure which comes from attainment of knowledge or attainment of something beyond yourself, which is what meditation gives you. So these things are neuroscientifically true.
Correct.
So when I read it, I realized that these are hard problems of life. These problems are not new. Conflict is not new. Ever since human beings became conscious of themselves, they have felt conflict.
Correct.
So to ignore something that old, that has put in so much thought and effort into solving these problems, if you don't make use of it, we are the fools.
Right.
So that's why I made that reel. That's why I made the whole those live streams. I wanted to understand it at my level.
So what's your favorite verse from the Gita and
Ooh.
interpret it from a scientific lens for me.
I can't remember the chapter name.
That's okay. Like
So
a loose, yeah.
one of the things that I really liked was one of the verses described how should you eat food, and it says you can eat anything, but eat it within 3 hours of making it. And I felt so surprised because Bhagavad Gita seemed to me like a very spiritual, philosophical book, and here it is giving a very practical advice. And I actually tried to do that for a month, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
Eat whatever you want, but eat it within 3 hours of making it, which means automatically you will not eat anything packaged.
Yeah.
You'll not eat anything which is preheated. You won't eat anything. Restaurants would be out because they usually make stuff and keep.
It. Yeah.
But if it's something that is being made in front of you, you can have it. And you actually end up feeling much healthier.
Yeah.
So I really loved that in the midst of all this philosophy and metaphysics, it gives you such a practical piece of advice that really helps you live better.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And the other thing was the importance of bhakti. That really affected me. Because one of the things of ego is that we hold on to ourselves and our pride really strongly. So the idea of surrender is very difficult. Surrender is taken as a negative thing, right? Because if you're victorious, people will surrender to you. So the idea of you surrendering to anything is considered as a loss. You've lost,
Yeah.
But the way Bhagavad Gita talks about it is that there are certain behavior patterns in yourself that you will only unlock after you've surrendered.
Correct.
And so surrendering becomes an act of bravery because it's not easy to surrender. And then you realize that some of the most beautiful things in life you've experienced has come about because you've surrendered. Whether that's in love, if you surrender to a person, you stop fighting. You stop fighting to be right, or you stop fighting to be superior. You just surrender. For that moment, it's really beautiful. Love is really beautiful when you've surrendered. When you surrender to a cause, when you've surrendered to an act, you suddenly become free. So there is a lovely irony there, where freedom and surrender, they are not really opposites. They could probably mean the same thing. So I really loved that part. I loved that verse.